Okay, today's installment, 2 minutes to midnight. My story on this one is a little odd. It's technically somewhere between a review copy and a gift. What happened was, with a couple of games, I was asked if I wanted to do a review for them. I expressed some interest. And then as things started solidifying, I was like, I can't actually commit before the games were sent out or whatever. And in two of those cases, the designer, publishers, whatever, different people, said, you know what, we'll just send it to you, anyway. Probably knowing that, assuming I survived the year, that at some point or another, within their schedule, I would probably actually be able to review. And that's what's turned out to happen. One of the things is I really wanted to get this covered, but I also have the big thing upstairs. And felt like a good time to take a break from that because I didn't want to quit it early, which would have been a possibility. So what you've got is a Twilight Struggle type situation. But although when I first looked at it, I thought, it was kind of like a Twilight Struggle type game, right? Well, there's a lot more board, not for any great reason. It's just, it takes up a lot more space. I don't know if that's going to be the final production version. This is a nicely made, very nicely made prototype. And I'm not sure how much of what is here is going to be the same and how much is not. So for example, I know the cubes are going to be a little different, maybe a little bigger, which makes sense. They're a little too small for this size map. They would have fitted better on a smaller map. And the dice that come with it, which actually are two-colored. They're actually pretty decent dice, but I think there's a different size for them. But I can't stand dice even that big. I think they're going to go with bigger ones than that. So I've got these guys here, which is okay. I could be using two colors. There are some cases where there's competitive die rolls where both players are kind of rolling at once. Well, this is what I had downstairs, so screw it. Okay. And let's see, what else can we say? Yeah, well, let's take a look. You got your map, which is kind of like, the Twilight Struggle map, divided into areas. Less countries, perhaps, but with bigger amounts of space. And you need that bigger amount of space to hold the counters in some of the more complicated countries where more is going on. The US and Soviets each have their own sort of player card. These are built into the map. There is a copy of the Soviet one, so that if you don't want to be both sitting facing this way, each player can have a sheet facing themselves. There is a solo bot, and the game, is also aware of the fact that some of us like to just play multiple hats and are fine with that. We'll go into the counters and the specifics there probably as we go through the rules more. You have a tech chart. It's not a very complicated chart. For the most part, it's linear, but there is a little bit of places where you can make different choices as to which direction to go. And you can eventually go in all directions. It's just whichever direction, you go in, you might then choose to follow the other direction as well, where that's the case. Some of these are sort of temporary, I believe. Just one, the code-breaking one. That goes away at the end of every turn. The idea there being not so much that it's code-breaking technology, but you've expended the effort to break codes once you have the computing power to do so. I'm not sure how much I buy that for this simple reason. As we get further along here, encryption techniques, etc., become easier to crack weaker version, weaker, computationally weaker specimens from earlier computing. So if you fall behind in the computer race, this is a little, as someone who deals with this, a little bit outside of the believable. The truth of the matter is, whoever has the computing advantage, if they expend, if you had almost any computing advantage, or you were equal in computing, you could probably expend to code break. But if you have enough of a computing advantage, you can probably do it at almost no cost. And that's not really reflected in the way the game goes. You have your turn record chart, which has a couple of pieces of information on it. The amount of money that each of the two major players has in the deck. I'll explain that in a little bit, but, there's essentially money cards. And these are your actions in the game. So you know how maybe you do, maybe you don't. In Twilight Struggle, you draw a card, or you draw a handful of cards, and you make choices based on whether you want to play the event or whether you want to play for ops points. And those ops points, kind of balance out the events. So good events often... You're making an expensive choice when you take the event or when you take the ops points. You have to make a hard decision there. This game doesn't have that. What this game has is a set of cards. The numbers up here are the turn that they are in play. Some of them are in play all the time and they've got A's on them. Some of them are brought into play by events, whatever. And what's going to happen is you just flip over a card and you deal with what it says. And the only time you kind of have freedom to do stuff is on the money cards. And there aren't a lot of them in the deck. Now, there's capabilities to increase the amount of money cards in the deck, although they're somewhat limited. Let's look at some of the other stuff here, and then we'll go to the board. This is a little box, just keeps track of how many tech markers, how many tech advances the U.S. has made. Once any pair is in here, it ends up getting deployed to the board as something that can be stolen without specifying what the tech is. This is capabilities that you get from having computers. Bunkers are just something that you can build pretty much for a cost of research at any time that you want, but you only have one each. And what they do is they can cancel out strategic weapons, but certain strategic weapons will cancel each other out. And you've got that here. So the U.S. has one bomber. That's a unique weapon no one else has. The Russians don't have nukes yet. So they get 2 points off that bomber. Well, the Russians could actually expend their bunker and get rid of that 2-point advantage. But you have the strategic outlook, which is a series of different tracks that are kind of picturing more. They're picturing the tech situation in a little bit at a higher level than the details of individual techs. So the nuclear balance is going to be based on how many strategic weapons you have. And in this case, the U.S. has one, it's unique, and it's worth 2 points. If they had another bomber, that would be worth a 3rd point. It wouldn't be unique. Conventional balance is going to start in the USSR's advantage. That's not for any particular reason on the board that I'm aware of. Well, maybe it is. They have 2 armies on the board. I don't seem to remember that armies increase that, though. So I may be mistaken about that. But they actually have their armies deployed. The U.S. armies are over here sitting in the force pool, ready to be deployed if they wish to be. In addition, though, the NATO has, well, there's not a NATO yet, but France has forces in Vietnam. So if you were to balance it out, that wouldn't really make sense. There would only be a 1-point differential. So I don't think that's the case, but I don't remember anything about it. One of the things about this game is it's got a messy, messy rule book in terms of presentation. I played a little bit of the game, about a turn and a half, and said, you know what? If I get too used to this, you're not going to see the pain of the rule book. And I think it's kind of important to do so when you're making any kind of judgment as to how good something is. And also, they may have, because this is not in regular print yet, they may have some opportunity to fix some things. Like I said, this is not, the final view of the board, etc. And perhaps some input that I can give through that might be helpful. It's probably too late in the process at this point. This is probably just a sales pitch from their point of view. Had I gotten it earlier and been able to do it then, this is not their fault at all, because I don't ever want to be an early person on it. I want to get my copy. I want to hold my copy, Not because, sometimes review copies mean that you're going to get a clean copy later or whatever. But for me, as soon as I start playing a game and I own it, I can't bear to not have it. I might lend it out or something, but once it's in my dirty, grubby hands, that's where I want it. Okay, so let's look at these other charts. So the US and the Soviets have different player aids here. The Soviets are interested, well, if one of the things that they're capable of doing is producing excess oil. They don't have any at the beginning of the game, but they can do things that increase it. I don't know what this 5+ is. I think it means there's a die roll and maybe they get an oil. We'll see when we look at the rule for that. A lot of the stuff I didn't get to. It's baked into the cards. It comes through. I also found myself making a lot of mistakes, which now when I started looking over it, through play I was discovering them, and after play I ran into some of the things. It's not an easy game to assimilate the rules for. And some of that may be the rules, the way the rules themselves are formatted and presented. Some of it, I think, is just the mass of little pieces that are thrown at you. You're going to be given a very, very interrelated set of capabilities and functionality that just plays out. And there's a whole lot of things you can do, and it's not really clear what you should do. It's pretty clear in Twilight Struggle as the example. This is what it's kind of. It's kind of like, hey, let me have Twilight Struggle with more meat to it, right? And Victory Games Cold War doesn't do that either. It's probably at least as light as Twilight Struggle in its own way. Well, the meat here is in making decisions of which little levers to pull. And it's not really clear what the effects of playing with any particular little dial or whatever is going to have. Okay, at least to me. The price of oil is going to be the excess money that's generated by oil. Again, we'll look into the specifics of that in the rule. The 5-year plan, at the beginning of the game, the Soviets are worried about getting their agriculture up. What this is if they can get an advance in that technology, I better check those. I think I got them all, but I'm not sure. If they can get the first advance in Soviet agriculture, they've succeeded in this, and it gives them a bonus. That bonus is kind of victory points, and it's also not entirely clear in the rules whether you get a whole victory condition or, and that's this other thing, victory progress here, a space on the progress track. The only way I could find that out was by looking at, they have a play, an example of play, where they go through kind of the first turn of the game. And, luckily that's a pretty common feature. In some cases, I'm finding myself not knowing how to interpret certain cards without looking in there. And that works fine for the turn 1 cards and for the all turns cards. Not so good if there's later cards. So I got some worries there. Okay. Tech theft placement. Whenever a tech theft is available, you roll and see where it's going to show up. And the Soviets get to pick amongst, if there's multiple options in one die roll. Okay. Soviets are also concerned about what kind of leader they have. At the beginning of the game, it's Stalin. Stalin's going to die, though, and then you start getting potentially different types of leaders. And those leaders affect the next leader. Okay, so the further you are in the hardline position, the more likely your next leader is going to end up in the further reform position. There's progressives, but they're restricted until this goes away, and I don't remember what gets rid of that. There's also a +1 to the table for the leaders if you're winning the game. Winning being you have more of these than the opponent does. Now, in order to win the game, you have to have 3 more of them than your opponent does. At the beginning of the game, they're tied, but the Ruskies have a lot of advantages early on in the game from at least the title of the first scenario. Western trade, this comes at the end of each turn. You don't necessarily get any, though, as shown with this die chart. And it's stuff that's available to the Russians. In some cases, it might be some farm technology or additional I'm trying to remember what this is. That allows you to prospect for oil better, basically. And then this is overall tech. I guess 1 farm and 1 industry, the way they have it written. I'm not sure. Force pool, where you keep things that you haven't built yet. Again, how that gets populated throughout the game, I don't really remember seeing that rule. I felt like I had to make an assumption there, which is if you develop a new technology and get a new type of weapon, for example, ICBMs, all of you get one when you achieve the technology, just like you will with nukes when you achieve the technology, but all of them become buildable. Well, that can't be the case, though, because I have a limited number of nukes sitting here. So I don't really know. Maybe there's cards that allow you to develop your force pool out. We'll see. Okay. For the U.S., one of their key factors is the national debt. At the beginning of the game, they start in hock. I mean, World War II cost the United States a lot of resources, and they financed it mainly using the financial instruments. Well, each turn, the U.S. will move forward a debt. There may be ways you can increase it. You can improve your debt situation at other points. That's all fine and dandy. Nothing really changes as the debt goes away, although I think maybe when you leave this one, I think the Russians lose a big victory level. But when you're going the other way, these cause unrest in the United States. This causes the Russians to gain a victory level. And then these last two, if you end up taking debt, the way the debt mechanism works is you add debt money to the deck. That's going to be another action you get to do. And you do it by spending a space on the debt chart. Well, in these 2 spaces, if you do that, there's a high chance, 5 or more, 4 or more, that you actually don't even get the money card. All you get is the debt. You have the president who's randomly rolled. He will have 2 capabilities. Well, maybe 1 if he rolls the same die roll for both things. And they create certain capabilities that you have during the course of your turn that you can use. At the beginning of the game, it's re-roll an influence die roll on a non-communist government. I don't know if that's only your own. And then this one's re-roll a trade roll, which is pretty easy. That's done during your own turns. You can basically change what's available for trade if the Russians haven't taken advantage of it yet. At the end here, There's a star, which is a victory point. We also have a force pool and a victory progress track. The U.S. track is bigger than the Russian track, which means the U.S. has to succeed in more things to get better. But they have to fail in more things to get worse, too. So it's kind of for the most part, there's a lot of things that you can gain points for. All right. For the areas on the board, they have significant pieces of information on them. There are 3 different color spaces on the board. They indicate the default government of that territory. So the dark blue is going to be default democratic, the dark red is going to be default communist, and the grays are going to be authoritarian by default. It's possible to change that. Yugoslavia has this disc on it. It's currently communist, but it would default to an authoritarian government. Which affects certain things, even though it's communist at the beginning of the game. Same thing with Iran. It starts out democratic. I don't know how much I'm buying, honestly, some of these choices here as to how how democratic is South Africa when the majority of the population is not involved. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what you want to call that. But likewise, the Iranian government, like Afghanistan's government, is more tribal at this stage, I think. And calling it democratic, and I may be off my rocker there, but I don't know. And things like Bangladesh, I do not think of Bangladesh and Burma as being terribly democratic at this period. The Philippines, not really. Maybe again I'm missing something. South Korea. Okay. So let us start to look. Oh, well, the cards. The cards have certain values on them. This is the turn they come into play. The player whose card it is, the fact that it's your card allows you some additional options. I think the only one is really that you have the option to trigger a couple of spies during that card play. And they can be done either before or after the card, but not in the midst. And I don't know if you can split them. This little track here, two of the cards in every deck are the Civil War cards. The first one helps you set up some additional Civil Wars. They're the same card. It's just whichever one is drawn first in a turn helps you set up the Civil Wars for that turn, any additional ones. The second one, all the Civil Wars get resolved. And so probably something that feels timing-wise a little weird. Now, the way the deck is constructed is, well, there's 9 turns. Each turn has its own deck of cards and a bunch of cards that stay in the deck. Some of them will stay in throughout the game. Some of them come out, not necessarily on the turn they show up, but possibly on other turns. Whew. What happens is you flip a card and you see what it does. And in the midst of what it does, you may make some decisions that allow you to trigger, some of your capabilities, whatever. A money card allows you to trigger those capabilities with a lot of freedom. Some of the other cards give you the same kind of capabilities, but with more restrictions to them. And some of the cards don't really let you make any choices at all. They're just rolling a die in an event. So you've got all of the historical events in here, and maybe some ahistorical. Basically, most of the cards that have historical events are going to be split. I'll take a look at one here. Well, see, this one's not a great choice because this is kind of a very generic thing. Well, maybe not. So you roll a die, and each player gets certain options based on that die roll for that card. So events that happened historically may have an opposite effect or no effect So there's no guarantee you're going to see, you know, the events that actually happened, and you may see wildly different choices coming up that the designers decided were believable and fitting. Okay. Oh. Let's see if I got anything that I got these black cubes. These I don't really know what they do. They seem to be largely superfluous. You can use them for certain things. For example, on the player charts, sometimes they might serve a purpose where it doesn't specify, you know, you don't really have to use a red or blue cube. Other than that, I don't see a use for them in the game. You have weapon systems. You have these, which are really, really weird. Again, something I don't really see a use for. So these cover all the nations which, and the rules don't tell you anything to do with them that I've seen, which are adjacent to one of the home countries. Okay, so there's a whole lot more of them for the Russians than there are for the U.S. The U.S. is only adjacent to Canada, Cuba, Mexico, and Japan. That's it. Russia is adjacent to a number of things here, and then a number of things up here. Russia is big. That adjacency causes problems if the other player gets control of that area. And we'll go into some more detail because it actually varies on who you are, too. It can cause some unrest. It can do worse than that. I'm going to need to breathe, and I know that this camera, it's going to divide up the video into pieces anyway. Things you start off with the rules. It's generally standard, especially with these kind of full color type rule books, to give a little bit more of the information about the components. I've given you pretty much as I could that I think belongs, but I don't know some of the stuff because there's no easy reference for that stuff. Now, there are a bunch of player aids, some of them, you know, very, very helpful. For example, these guys, which each player has 2 sheets that tell you a lot of the rules and a lot of commonly used things. Not all the charts that you need are on there, though. Sometimes you have to page through the rule book. There's also a bunch of these, which are one per scenario. There's several scenarios, which are basically just different starting points in the game. Your choices for ending the game are either play it all the way through or set a certain number of turns and play that many turns. Scenario 1 is kind of weird because you really got to get it out to at least turn 4 or 5 for it to make much sense. So that's half a game right there, whereas some of the other scenarios start fairly late. Now, what does this give you that's valuable? I don't know. You know, I mean, one side of it is an image of information that's present in the setup instructions. You know, okay, maybe. And then the other is this. And I can do a quick visual check and see, do I have everything? And I do, and that's kind of useful. And there's, you know, some scenario notes and whatnot that I think are actually available in the text portion of the rules, of the setup for the rules. So, you know, okay, it's kind of a nice to have, but it might have been better to have more of the charts in play. But anyway, going back to this, while you have numbers for things, there's not a lot of good cross-referencing, and the numbering sometimes, I don't know, it's sometimes a little wanky. That's all I have to say about it. But what you don't have is something that kind of describes what all the different tracks and things relate to. So, for example, with components, They tell you got 40 red, blue, and black cubes. These are influenced, the will of the ruling class, judiciary, or the people at large. Well, my immediate thought is, okay, one of them is the ruling class, one's the judiciary, and one's the people at large. No, that's just fluff. Blue is US, red is Russia, and black is, I don't know, do you need a cube for something? I mean, that's the best. Do you need a cube and you don't want to use a colored cube for some reason? Maybe there aren't all that many of them or whatever, but don't see much. The plastic discs are used here on the tech track and on these so that you can see through them and read what's under them. That's kind of a useful thing, and it is kind of explained there. And the wooden discs, but they talk about them both as discs within the rules. They don't specify wooden versus plastic disc, but if it goes on the board, it's a wooden disc, is really what it comes to. And these represent the government types if it's different from what is shown on the board. And I think, you know, referring to that's fine. But what you don't have is, hey, just what are the factories? Just what are the, how does the oil work? You know, and it would be useful to have each of these called out with a reference into the rule that they apply to, written into the rule book. Now, with this glossy rule book, and I presume the final rule book will also be glossy instead of writable paper that you can put notes in and whatnot. You know, if you want to put notes in it, you're talking about using something like a Sharpie to write on it, probably. Something indelible, because I can't guarantee it. But my experience with glossy paper is you write on it and pencil doesn't really take, and pen smudges, not that you really want to use pen on it anyway of any kind. Anyway. The game's going to be 9 turns. There's a lot of cards in each deck, a lot of flipovers. The way the flipover mechanism works is somewhere between, it's not quite CDG, it's not quite coin. You're flipping over a card, and that is the activity that takes place on that card. You know, and that activity may be that the player gets to do an investment action, I think it's called, which is the place where they're going to have the most freedom, where they get a money card, essentially. We do have it spelled out here. So the economic worth is the factory symbol. Some count as 2 factories each and are marked as 2. Some things aren't specified. So, for example, if factories are covered, it's not absolutely clear whether or not those factories should just be ignored. Well, maybe it's spelled out somewhere, but we'll see. A government type, possible oil worth shown by oil barrels. The oil barrels might have a turn number on them, which indicates that they're not available until that turn. They don't count for anything. Several countries have trade markers associated with, that's these. These are covering up factories. You've got to clear these somehow. Now, the easiest ones to clear are repairs. The other ones are investments, and this is what I screwed up. They have a negative number on them, which is going to affect your chance of bringing that investment to bear. I was generating lots and lots of points by doing investment activities because I didn't really pay attention to those negative numbers up there. They are written somewhere, but it's not here. Where it is on the actual action, and I'll show you how it's written, and this is why it doesn't really spew out. This is the kind of presentation that you have. So this is the particular one you're looking at, is investment, and this little piece of the roll here. You roll 2 dice, you need a 6 or more, you get a +1 per own investment. It's that -1 for the counter modifier that is the piece that, you know, just didn't sink in. Information that's only presented in charts is harder for me to assess. Different people learn different ways, and in general that means some sort of redundancy in the rules is useful. It's also helpful when you're looking something up. Why is it difficult? Well, If you want to tinker with things, it's a lot easier to tinker with it in one place on a little chart or something than it is to try to find those changes in the rules. However, for a polished, finished product, I think it would be helpful to cover it in more places. Anyway, it just didn't sink in. I didn't realize that it was wrong until after I'd played through that first turn and a half. I'll get it right now, but it's going to change my understanding of how to manipulate the game. Not that I have much of one. Player mat, and this does spell out lightly what these things do. It's not necessarily telling you all the specifics. This is not where you're going to go to find the specifics. You're going to be paging through the rules to find the specific investment type or whatever. Whatever place these charts are mentioned in the rules is where you're going to find them. And there's no reference back to those places in here, which would be useful. Counters. No explanation of what the counters do. Okay, so, you know, right here it's a little harder to pick up what they're going to do, etc. The tech research. So this talks about some key issues here, which will be, it gives a little bit more description than, say, the counters do, where it talks about, hey, you know, the nuclear balance is going to determine whether or not mutual assured destruction prevents an invasion, right? The conventional balance determines whether or not you can take aggressive actions, whether or not you can do some sort of invasion type situation. Now there's differences there because, like, the reaction to Hungary, that's a reaction to a coup, and that's a different kind of thing than an aggression. And then the Naval Advantage, well, there's this +1 advantage. I have no idea what that means. These others, this one gives you a bonus on the intel assessment chart. This one gives you a bonus on the nuclear balance if you get the naval high enough. For whatever that's worth. They talk about the card deck. They go into a lot of detail about remove and cycle, and that's appreciated. That definitely. Otherwise, things like that. That's a good way to describe things. I feel like they're using a lot of space, big font, a lot of empty space on the pages. That's both good and bad. You know, it's easier to read, etc. It does create quite a bit of rulebook. The quality of the rulebook is very heavy quality paper, but it's glossy. That's probably a bigger minus for me than the thickness of the paper is a plus. But again, personal tastes. Okay, then we start going into the individual situations in the rules, and a lot of these are just kind of going to be described not in the context of the rules, but more as big concepts. The context of the rules is really this gameplay here, I guess. Not really, that's just the money cards. It's a hard game to present a unified narrative about the turn, because it's very simple on one level. You turn over a card and you follow the instructions on the card. If it's a money card, you get to do this more complicated set of things. Section 3 is like lots of things that happen from the cards, but so is Section 4, you know? I mean, parts of Section 4 are things that come from the cards, or things that, you know, there's sort of it's hard to segment this into that number structure in a good way. All the more reason that you need, I think, a means of indexing into things. There's no index in the back, by the way. What there is the scenario instructions, a fairly detailed playthrough of the first turn. Not too many rules on the solo bot. They have additional cards. Didn't even bother looking at that. I don't consider that something of importance to me. So you don't want to be watching my playthrough if you want to understand what the effects of the solo is. Okay, so let's start taking a look now at whatever the hell we're at. Yeah, so like unrest is being dealt with over here because it does interfere in everything, and there's not a lot of entangling between different sections. You won't find what you're looking for by necessarily looking in the place you'd think, like, say, the unrest. Okay, but the base idea of unrest is that there are these little red things here, and they are capable of generating coups in everything except home countries. Home countries have special rules for the unrest markers. The coup number for a country is specified here. It's 3 for normal countries, 2 for an authoritarian. So if there's 2 unrest in an authoritarian government, it will have a potential coup. It makes a coup check. The others are 3s, but there are exceptions. So like Norway and Sweden and Finland have these numbers right printed on the national area itself, which indicates a different superseding coup value. And that's all we're going to talk about coups, because they come in later in the rules. Yeah. Even though the only way they get triggered is through unrest events, they're just, you got to shuffle these rules together somehow. So then we go to, well, what happens if there's unrest in your home country? Well, if there's 3 or more in the home country, then you must do investment actions whenever you get money in order to reduce the amount of unrest that there is. Your own country's not going to get couped. I don't think it can be militarily invaded. I'm not sure. It's highly unlikely once you get to a certain point in the game, but it might be possible to roll into Russia if they never build nukes. Okay. For the Russians, and I think that's spelled out here, they're allowed to try to use spies. They can buy spies in order to suppress unrest, which is one of their special abilities. Although nothing's expressed as like, this is a special ability of this thing. It's just like this player only. Well, there's only 2 players, so. Okay. Now we go to another thing. Now this is under unrest. And it has nothing to do, it's not, you know, it should be its own section. Non-homeland country influence. Countries are either neutral, aligned, or fully aligned. If it's fully aligned, there should be this should be 2.3, you know, I mean, it is its own section. If it's fully aligned, it's easier to place friendly influence in all adjacent countries in a domino effect. Alignment is going to be based on the number of cubes you have. 1 cube indicates that you've aligned the country. 2 cubes is fully aligned. 3 cubes is the maximum number of cubes you can have. It doesn't give you any bonuses. Fully aligned, okay. So you can only have influence from 1 superpower. It's like it's like the flipped over counters in Twilight Struggle, essentially. They indicate that you have control of the area. A little bit less granularity to them, but, you know, the details elsewhere in this game. So, yeah. So if you're going to be placing a cube, and the enemy has a cube there, you remove one of their cubes instead. Money. Money is sort of the hardest thing to understand in this game. At least from the rule book. This is one that, like, I read it, I didn't get it, start playing it, and it's like, it's pretty damn easy. What it comes down to is, there's money cards in here, they let you do stuff. That's the answer to it. There are different ways to create money. Some of it's dealt into the deck automatically. Uh-oh, gotta swap batteries. There are extra cards that can be put into the deck for reparations, which only go to the Soviets. There's a couple of countries that owe them money, according to the treaty. And, wow, is that all I have? There's got to be another one. So I know there was a lost one that I couldn't find. I got Hungary, I got 3 in East Germany. Ah, the Austrian one. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's reparations which go to the Soviets. And they have their own special cards which are used. And they're 1 use each. Basically, you create unrest in that country and you get reparations from it. Now, the way it's set up, only Austria is a pleasant place for the Soviets to take reparations from. The other places they get them from are communist countries, and you may not want to create additional unrest in those countries. But oil, the Russian oil production can generate additional money. Debt, the U.S. can shift their national debt and get extra money. The reparation ones are single-use cards, the others not so much. The Soviets have a military exports card, which is a normal money card, but one of the cards that's accounted for in there is going to be their military export. And it's special because they're allowed to buy trade items with it. The only other money they can use for trade items is their oil money, if they ever get any. I don't know. I didn't manage it in my turn and a half, but I got a chance to start creating some, I think. Okay. Soviet oil is gained by the Soviet player depending on the position of the Soviet oil production track. It has no connection to oil marked on the map. What does oil marked on the map do? I don't know. We don't understand that yet. It may have something to do with cards. It may not. We're just not sure. We couldn't find it. It can be sold on the world market at a price of either 1, 2, or 3 money, depending on the current oil price, which is tracked on their Soviet chart. When an oil production card comes out of the deck, the Soviet player checks the oil price, and if more than one, he adds extra money that the oil is worth into the current deck with the oil money cards. Okay. I don't know about that. More than one? Just don't know. When an oil production comes out of the deck, the Soviet player checks the oil price. Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that the playthrough example is not going to show the oil being used because it's only the first turn of the game. That stuff's not used, and there's no example here. U.S. national debt. At the end of each turn, the U.S. national debt moves 1 to the right. They get better. Now, it's going to take them a long time, so there's got to be other ways to move it. And there are. At any time, when the current deck is not empty, they can move the track 1 or more spaces left and put more money into the deck, and it just gets shuffled into the remaining cards in that deck. That'll give them more stuff to do. It takes a while, though. Several boxes on the debt card effect have additional effects. We talked about some of those. When you hit the unrest markers, moving left, that adds unrest to the U.S. When you hit these guys, they don't get you money when you take debt for it. Hammer and sickle is awarded to the Soviet player when the U.S. debt is in or to the left of the hammer and sickle. I guess that means when you move to the right of it, the Soviets lose an entire victory symbol, which is awarded, C5.0. Okay. So here's the thing. I believe that is a full victory thing, a full chit. Just like I believe this is a full chit. And there may be some other things that are full chits, like up here. But there are other things that just affect their victory progress, which is a quarter of a full chit. And they're not well differentiated in the rules, and we'll see that when it comes there. That particular section is problematic. Okay, so we were talking about money and the debt, and that makes sense. And now we're up to money, events, and owed funds. Okay, sometimes during the turn, you get a card that's not a money card, and you have to spend money, or maybe you're able to. Whenever this happens, you take a money owed card, chit, which just means your next money card is used to get rid of that. This isn't debt. The U.S. has these chits too. They have their national debt. They also can owe money. And that money doesn't get charged interest. It doesn't cost you anything to take. It just means that, yeah, your next card will account for that. Okay. And you're not allowed to do anything else. Okay. Now they talk about gameplay, and what they go into is the money card. Now, that's under the basic gameplay, but then like operations with spies are taken under another number. Investment mini options, which are sort of a sub-option of the money card, but not entirely, are their own number. Again, you had to shuffle these together, but it ends up a confusing mess because there may not be a good way to structure these rules. I'm not sure. They certainly didn't find it. Okay, so a money card lets you do an item from this menu. So you could choose 2 influence rolls, or an influence roll and place 1 investment, or 2 investments, or 3 investments if they're all in 0 or 1 countries. Now, 0 and 1 countries aren't well defined. First of all, there are no 0 countries, unless that means countries that are completely shut out, or maybe the U.S. I don't know. There are no 0 countries on the board. They all have a factory on them. Okay? So, what does that mean? I don't know. I don't know what the intention there is. I've made it so that when I was playing, I counted this as a 3 country because it has a potential of 3 industry. Maybe it's supposed to be a 0 because it's got damaged industry, etc. Some countries which do not have damaged industry have investment markers on them. That's a little different from damaged. So, I don't know, do we treat them differently? Again, not clear. Okay. So, what is the worth of a country? Maybe it is the value that's currently there. Maybe that's the only way you can interpret that. And again, this is me interpreting it differently from when I tried it before, because there's no reason to specify 0-point countries. Now, somewhere they talk about the value, the worth of countries, right? Worth does not exist while it's covered. Okay. I think that handles it. But somewhere they talk about that there's nothing with a 0 worth, that everything has at least 1 worth for strategic value, if nothing else. I'm going to ignore that because I don't know how to find it. And I don't really want to point it out. I don't particularly need to find it. I think the answer is there are 0 worth countries that are covered up at the beginning of the game. And, well, that makes investment a little bit easier then, even though it was made harder by other things. Okay, you could also place a spy and make an influence roll, or place 1 investment. I'm assuming the or is influence or, as opposed, no commas, no parentheses. You could place 2 spies. So in general, each chit costs half a buck. You could research a technology, which is basically putting a cube up on the tech chart. You could build a military unit or place an army in a civil war. take something out of your force pool, move it to the board, I think. Again, I'm not sure because there's nukes in here that the U.S. doesn't have, and I don't know what that means. They don't have in their force pool at the beginning of the game. Resolve an aggression. Okay, aggressions have their own special sequence of rules. Those will be dealt with when they're dealt with, but you can spend your buck to trigger an aggression. This is the way or a way you do it. And remove an occupied marker and place an investment. Occupied markers aren't owned by anyone. It has to be an aligned country with your own color government. Okay. At least there's that. Which means you can't unoccupy Africa, which is something I tried to do. But again, lots of little pieces to the rules. Very, very easy, I think, to forget them. And unless this is going to be a game that you play several times, you're probably going to fuck up things. Trust me, I will. Okay. So let's go over the rules for each of these things. Place influence. 1d6. You need a 6 or more. Okay. You have modifiers for it. You pick a target country. Do we have a limit here? Maybe. Again, sometimes they're not where you'd want them to be, which is right up at the top. Neither influence nor unrest can be placed in a country in civil war. That's probably not too bad. Okay. Select a target country and roll a die. You get +1 for each your own investments in the country. Each investment that you have, which is just a token on the board. You get +1 if you're placing into your own colored government, or if any adjacent country is fully aligned with 2 influence. Now, I don't think that means adjacent to the US or USSR. I think it has to be adjacent to something with 2 cubes, something that's not the players. I mean, that's what the rules state, but again, it may not mean what they may not be meaning what they're saying. A failure has no effect. You've just wasted your money, your action on, or part of an action on that die roll. If the die roll is a failure, you can exhaust a spy in order to re-roll the die. You can also, or instead, use this to re-roll a die. You're only allowed 1 re-roll on any particular die, or action or something. I don't know. Here they say a die. So maybe if you're rolling 2 dice, you can only re-roll 1. I don't know. Some of the effects have that. Now, this is a little weird because this may be the only place where they mention that is buried in this set of rules. I'm familiar with it, but okay. What if you succeed? If you succeed, you get a cube, which might mean removing an enemy cube. Okay, investment. Investment's the one that I did a lot of. Seems like a great thing. Seems less like a great thing now that I'm facing these -4s on the table. But the purpose of this option is to put one of these investment markers on the board. And you can use these to remove enemy investments, help with your influence, and remove unrest and trade markers. You put an investment in any target country. If there's an enemy investment there, you remove them 1 for 1. Only one player can have the edge in investments. It may not be the person who has the edge in influence. Or, if the country has your own government and is aligned, you can instead deploy an available nuclear weapon in place of that investment. Now, as far as I can tell, at the beginning of the game, the U.S. has only 1 nuke that they can deploy. And we'll have to see more about how those are generated, because they have a whole pile of them, and I thought, like the other weapons, my feeling was they get deployed into your force pool, but that doesn't work with the nukes, and it may not work with any of them. Okay. Then when you do an investment, you go to another rule set, 3.2, to see what happens due to that investment. Like you have some additional options after you have either, once you place an investment and you've dealt with the enemy investment, or the country has your own government and is aligned to deploy an available nuclear weapon. For 3.2 for many actions as a result of placement. Okay. All right. Well, that's all we're talking about the investments. We're not going to talk about what you can do when you cause an investment, because there are other ways you can get an investment other than the money card. And again, this is that, hey, the game doesn't really align. You know, the rules get shuffled together and they kind of interleave and they don't really work. There may have been a way to design them, but I'm not sure. I have problems because it looks like that thing's not charging and both my batteries are dead. A little bit more off of this one, but yeah, this camera runs too hot to swap batteries continuously. My old one used to be able to do that, and I would be able to get through these rules. Okay, one of the things that you can do as part of your actions is to place spies. Again, kind of half a buck. You can place a spy in any country on the map. The spy is placed active, which is going to be this white barred side up, and can perform a spy mission this turn. Performing the mission flips it over, and it does a thing. The spy missions, like the effects of an investment marker, when an investment marker is placed, that causes a potential effect. Well, when you flip a spy, it causes an additional effect. However, you don't flip the spy just because you can place it. You flip spies only on your own color cards. You can do tech research. You can drop 1 cube on the board. If you have supercomputers, you put a cube in the computing box, and if there are 2 cubes in that box, you put 1 on the technology research chart and discard the other, i.e. you get half an extra research with the computers, with the supercomputer. If you have silicon transistors, you get an extra cube on the tech research chart instead of that half a cube that you get off the computers, off the supercomputers. When a technology is fully developed, the U.S., if the U.S. produces it, I assume, this is not stated here, with each technology fully developed, the U.S. player places a tech theft marker into the tech theft box up there. When there are 2, they're removed both, and you roll to generate a tech theft marker, which may not show up. But basically, again, 2 markers creates 1 possible effect on the board. You can build military. You select any unit available in your force pool on your player mat to build. Or place an available army into a civil war, which must have your own influence cube and no enemy army. Placing an army. If the U.S. does it, they have to put an unrest in the USA. A cube is added to the land-air chart. I think that's for both players, because that's 2. It's separate from the U.S. exemption, special case. So basically, if you're doing stuff, if you're deploying your military and using them, you get some technology out of it for ground troops. Okay. A roll is made, and on a 3 or plus, the Soviets will receive a free cube into the land air. Ah, okay. So the way the columns, the large words and everything are set up, sometimes I miss the trailing on something. So add 1 cube on the technology research chart on a die roll of 3 or more. Here, the requirement that you're the U.S. is stated first. Here, it's trailing at the end. It would be nice if they were consistent about that kind of stuff. Resolve an aggression. You have to be granted an aggression by your position on the conventional balance track. Minor aggression can be done on a 0 or 1 worth country, which is not occupied. A major aggression allows a roll against any country, occupied or not, and no matter how valuable. But yeah, you could roll right into one of these if the army wasn't already occupying them. Okay. And that has its own special sub-rule set. Now, this is a little weird because this is the only way that you can trigger this except by cards. And honestly, the investments, this is the main way you generate investments, but cards can do it. I don't know. I mean, build military gives the little extra roll, but it's very little. Over here, these other things branch into something else. The Soviets can put an occupied marker into a communist and aligned country. Now, this is weird. This doesn't come off your money card. This is something you can do at any point that a coup occurs. If a coup is rolled for, even if it's not the Soviet player's money card, yeah, that'll almost always be the case. Take a money owed marker, place the occupied marker, and then resolve the coup. But now resolve it with the occupation in place. So basically, the can be used immediately after a coup is rolled for, and it looks like you re-roll the coup again. But I don't know. Maybe you just get the capability of sending the military in knowing that it's going to succeed in affecting the die roll or something. We'll see. When we get to the coup rules, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. I don't have a 100% grasp on it, but whatever. And then you can use your buck. So this uses a buck, but not off your money card usually. You can use a buck off your money card to remove an occupied marker in an aligned country with your own color government. Okay, so it has to have your cube and your color government. If the Soviets remove a marker, they get a reform cube to the reforms and freedom track. Okay. That seems pretty clear. You can just pull an occupied marker off. Yeah, except over here, and I haven't been too careful about looking at this. If you go to remove occupation, that's not what it says. Here it is. Remove an... Okay, I thought it had to be in the same country. This is two things. You can remove an occupied marker and place an investment anywhere on the board. Okay. I thought it was you removed the occupied marker and you got an investment in there. It's not the case. It's one of the menu options is those two pieces together. And again, I see something, you know, these are linked together, but they're linked together in the same way as these other things, and it's just a little weird. It's nice to go back over the rules because I am catching some of these things. Okay, I have got to pause here because I am super low on batteries. I might have more upstairs. I don't know. The problem is I have these spare cameras. This one isn't charging because the little connector doesn't work quite right. See there, it's flashing a little bit. But then it'll stop. There we go. This one, I'll show you the problem with it. It doesn't turn off. It turns on as soon as you throw a battery in it because these stupid doors, these stupid panels, the wires in them get fucked up, which is why all my cameras are dead, because that's the little piece that dies when you open and close it. And so I may not have the capability to recharge two batteries at once while I'm playing a third one. It is sort of the advantage of why I keep using the same camera model is they have the same battery, but they're falling apart. It won't charge completely, but maybe it's charging faster than it's eating battery power. I don't know. We'll test that out. All right, back to what we've got. Okay, so remember how I said that there are special actions? Well, spy actions. Now, spy actions are now included under this same gameplay section, not shunted away the way investments are, even though they're equally like triggerable outside of the money card investment type thing. Okay, so when you do a spy action, in general, you're allowed to roll 2 dice if you're in the same country as the spy, if you're one country away following any of these connections, these are water connections, which have slightly different roles, but, and actually didn't go over that difference, which I think is spelled out somewhere. But of course, not in the section that says the map, is it? Nope. Yeah. There are differences between land and sea. One of the differences is there's stuff you can do where the naval balance ends up. If you don't have the if you have the naval advantage, you can interfere or prevent stuff from happening. We don't know any of that because it's not in the place in the rules where it belongs. Okay. So what can spies do? Well, when you use a spy, you flip it over and you take one of these actions, and only one. You're allowed to use 2 spies per card of your color when it comes up, which, unless you have something you really want to get done in a particular early in the turn or something, quite often means you wait till the end of the turn and hope you make a good guess as to how many cards you have left. Okay. One of them, suppress unrest. The Soviets are the only ones who can do this. They pick a communist country, and 1 die or 2, depending on how you're doing it. Usually it's 2 because, whatever. You need a 5 or more. No modifiers. Steal technology. At least I don't think any. I mean, who knows? The way it's presented with, hey, here's what happens, and, oh, well, where's the modifier? Well, here it is. Okay. That's not too far. Steal technology. The target country has to have a tech theft marker in it. The Soviets are the only ones who can do this. They roll. They need a 6. That probably means you want to be in the same space, but you get a +1 if there's unrest in the target country. Just no more than one of them. Each success removes 1 tech theft marker and applies 2 successes in 1 category towards tech advancement. Those 2 successes count as 2 cubes, and that could actually push you into fulfilling a technology and then moving forward and getting a cube in the forward space. However, there are exceptions. You can only get 1 success from theft in computers or industry, which is the industry category. That doesn't say anything about computers at the front end of it, or the farming, which is down here. And now they make a big deal about you should probably try to use tech theft to achieve your 5-year plan. But of course, your first 5-year plan is farming, and industry and farming are your most likely ones. And those are the 2 that you get the least off of. So maybe you actually want to invest in those rather than count on making rolls. There's more that hasn't been described. I'm trying to think of whether I want to touch it. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. So again, we don't know how the tech chart works from the rule book when this is being explained to us. But again, it's got to do with the way the interleaving is done. It's just not. It's not well organized, but I'm not convinced that there is such an organization available. You can only steal a technology that the U.S. already has, but they're assumed to have agricultural all the way up. Yeah, here's where they tell you should use tech theft. Secure secret. This is only for the U.S. You work in a country with a tech theft marker, you're trying to just remove that tech theft marker. Remove trade items. If there's any trade items, wherever the fuck they show up, over here, which I guess is a cube or a disc or something. You don't need a target country for this. It's going to come off the Western trade display. You roll 2 dice. Both dice have to roll a 4 or greater. If successful, you remove any item of your choice from the trade display. Can there be more than one? Distances and adjacency are irrelevant. 2 dice are always used, and you have to get them both. place unrest. Both players can do this. You need a 6 or more, and you're trying to place unrest into the target country. You get +1 if there's any unrest already there, I guess, in a 0 or 1 target country. Ignore if worth is 2 or more. Ignore what? Ignore the +1 if any unrest is in a worth 0 or 1 country? Or ignore this capability? I think it's the latter. I think you can't do it in a country worth 2 or more. Because richer countries have significant police and military and intelligence capabilities and are much harder to subvert. Not sure. Not sure either way. Each success places 1 unrest in the target. Well, you can only get 1 success off of any 1 spy activity. Even if you're rolling 2 dice, you still only get 1 success, right? That's what I understand. Not clear. Not clear. Yeah. My assumption has always been roll 2 dice, but I'm beginning to think that you can get 2 successes off 1 spy if they're in the same country. Don't know. See, this other rule for resolving coups due to placing unrest. Unrest can occur through other reasons too. At least this is not included under 3.0. Oh wait, we're in 3.1 now. What the hell is 3.1? 3.0 is here. 3.1 is spies. Okay, good. All right. And again, I don't know what the answer to this is. I don't know if this is redundant. +1 if any unrest in worth 0 or 1 target country. You wouldn't need to state that. But are you able to place unrest in 2s? You would think the way to state that would be to say it directly as a restriction on where you can try this. My hands are in the air. Maybe it's in the playthrough explaining somebody trying to do that. But again, that's how this game, you know, not only are the rules unable to be managed in terms of like corralling them into a good sequencing, but there's a lot of sloppiness in them. And I don't hold that against the final version. I don't know if this is the final version. Again, they made a real point to say, you're not getting the final version of the components. I'm hoping the rules get cleaned up a whole hell of a lot. I'm not sure that's possible, though. How do you do this kind of printing job on this kind of quality paper? Can you do it in small quantities? Maybe. I know there's a lot of capability to do kind of on-demand printing now. So, you know, maybe they ordered 10 of them or something, and they just look really professional, really nice. And that kind of subverts my thought of this is just a draft, you know. Okay, counterintelligence. Need a 6 or more, and you're trying to get rid of enemy spies. They go back in the force pool. +1 if the country is communist or authoritarian. +1 if there's more than 1 enemy spy in the country. The action cannot be resolved in a country with an enemy government type. And the idea there being, you can't, you know, go in and just start shooting up the National Intelligence Service of whatever kind that's established and aligned with that. You know. Okay, and we are almost out. Curious about that other thing. Okay, remember how I said investments trigger stuff potentially? Well, this is it. The investment mini-action section. So there's 2 things you can take in any country in which an investment has just been placed. These can be taken at any time investments are placed, via cards or game effects. They're not compulsory. All available investment must be placed before any die rolls are made.
Remove one investment marker in a country to remove one unrest. If the country is democratic, this can be repeated in the country, taking multiple investment markers to remove multiple unrest. This means that the Soviet homeland can only use one investment to remove an unrest, which might mean the only thing they can do with their money card is build spies there, because remember, they're restricted if there's 3 or more unrest. Roll to remove one trade or destruction marker. That's these things. The destruction is the buildings, the trade is the piles of money. You get +1 for each you're going to roll 2 dice. You keep only the highest die, and you're looking for a 6 or more. You get +1 for each investment that you have in the country, and minus any modifier on the trade marker that you're trying to trigger. And the markers are always done in this order. So the free one, then the -2, then the -4 in this case, whatever. Yeah, and here the destructions have none. Any success removes the leftmost trade marker from the target, making the country more valuable, and you remove all the investment markers. A failure has no effect, and no investment markers are removed. So you can trade away investments for unrest, with limitations on the communists, and you can make a die roll to try to get one level of higher industrialization worth, is really what it is, in a country, although it may be more than one level. As you can see, this goes up by 2. By rolling, but some of those have a higher penalty. If you succeed, if you fail at trying to increase the worth, there's no real cost to making the roll. It's if you succeed that there's a cost. You lose all your investment markers. That could be important in the case of, say, a civil war, and you'll see that in a bit. Okay, we're going to have to play around with the batteries again, see what we come up with. A completely different type of thing, which is coups. At various points in the game, the number of unrest markers in a country could equal the amount necessary for a coup. When that happens, due to cards, due to investments, spies, whatever, I don't know about investments doing it, but occupation can do it. These occupations count as one unrest in whatever countries they're in, which makes these all just ready to coup, but they'll still occupied is what I was going to say, but that may or may not happen, actually. We'll see the effects of the coup. Okay, so if you match that requirement, sort of after everything's done for a card play or whatever, you go to the coup results, and you're going to, first of all, if there's no influence present, and there's a unless it's an occupied country, if it has a government marker in it, that government marker is going to go away. But if it's occupied, that's not the case. And the country will be set to 1 unrest. Roll a die and place one U.S. influence on a 1 or a Soviet influence on a 5 or 6. So it kind of becomes a jump shot. Otherwise, you roll 2 dice and take the highest die roll. I wish this mechanism was used across the board in the game, but it's not. Always the question of, fine-tuning and balancing things versus trying to have a unified system. Here they went with fine-tuning, and I can't object to that directly. Okay, so you roll 2 dice. The player who stands to gain will be rolling the dice, and we'll see it's written kind of in their terms. So if you get a 5 or more on that die, on the higher die, you remove an opposing influence, or if there isn't one present, you get a friendly influence. The high die roll was a 6. You do that again. You get a second level of influence in that country. You replace the current government with the coup winner's government unless it's an occupied country. If it's occupied, the government's not altered. Well, so here's the thing. Oh, no, there had to be influence present. Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. There will always be an opposing influence available unless you're repeating step one. So you'd be swinging it from perhaps one in your disfavor to one in your favor. In that case. Replace the current government, yeah, unless it's occupied, and set the country to one unrest, leaving only the occupied unrest marker if it's still present. All right. On a roll of a 4, a strongman takes power. You remove an opposing influence, or if not present, place a friendly influence. That shouldn't be possible, the second part, because you've already passed the there's no influence present. And you are, if you're the player with influence, or a government in the country, it's kind of weird the way that's worded, because you've already gotten through the no influence present, right? So this is also kind of weird here. And again, maybe I can look at the playthrough. I read this as, if there's no influence present, that's the conditional. Do all of this, with the unless as a secondary conditional in that. But maybe what they mean, and maybe this is the way to resolve what I'm reading here, is if there is no influence present and it is not an occupied country, if that combination is the conditional, again, then you might actually come to a condition where the opponent, so if there's no influence present, but it is occupied, you might get down to here if you try to read the rules that way. Don't know which way it's supposed to go. My assumption was read the conditional as the underlined part, not worry about the other part until I've dealt with that. So there's no influence, this is what I do. There's influence, this is what I do. That doesn't seem to be in compliance with, or in conformity with what I'm reading here, though, because it's taught this one, it's possible step one could be repeated. Here, though, it is not. So they say remove an opposing influence, or if not present, place a friendly influence. Well, there will be one present, because otherwise you triggered this. Replace the current government with an authoritarian government unless it is an occupied country. If it's occupied, the government's not altered. Set the country to one unrest, leaving only occupied present. Country slides into armed conflict. If the country is occupied or has a worth of 2 or more, no effect. Set the country to one unrest, leaving only occupied unrest if present, and stop. Otherwise, place a civil war in the country and cover the rightmost revealed factory symbol with a destruction marker. So most of the destruction markers are on the board to begin with, but when a civil war happens, this comes. However, if the country has a worth of 2 or more, there's no effect. There will only be one factory symbol worth marker there, right? Again, I'm reading things that are leading me to believe that, geez, either they weren't thinking very hard when they wrote this, in which case, you know, I don't care. Interpret the shit however you like. You know, if they weren't, if you can't tell what the fuck's going on from the rules, if every single fucking rule has to be looked into in the play, in the play example, you're not explaining the game. And I had this feeling as I was reading the rules. More and more, I'm seeing the evidence for it. You know, the first time I read through them, I just read the rules, then I tried playing, ran into a couple of places where I felt like I was running into issues like this. These rules are not ready for prime time. This game should not be released with this rule set. I don't know what they're going to do, but not this rule set. Now, don't think I'm just harshing on the game, because I actually kind of like the mechanisms in it, and you'll see as I try to play it, you know, what we're getting out of it. But I may be playing it wrong because of this rule set. Okay. So yeah, you set the country to unrest. Otherwise, place one Civil War marker and cover the rightmost revealed factory with a destruction symbol. If there is only one factory, there it is, the rightmost one. There will only be one, by the way this is written. There will only be one. Right? Because of this, or has a worth of 2 or more, no effect. There's no other way this can happen. I mean, I found my way to weasel around how this might all make sense together if the rules writers were really terrible, but maybe it's easier just to read it the way I read it and deal with the fact that they're really terrible, but they're so terrible that, like... All right, time to swap batteries again and get that thing so that it's actually charging. I fear that other camera did not charge this. All right, well, we're done for now then, because we know that's not very well charged because it was not showing charging. So we'll get to Civil Wars in a little bit. And yeah, this is a continuing problem I've had with these cameras. You know, that thing didn't ever work terribly well. It sits poorly in the socket, in the outlets. And these used to be my backup, but this is burning almost as much energy as it's generating. We should have enough juice now. I got the one battery that wasn't charging, a fully charged one there. Yeah, I know you don't care. Well, honestly, if you're still here, maybe you do. Maybe it's as good as anything else. All right, Civil Wars. So, what I was trying to say, I think, is the way the Civil War is triggered, we already talked about. The first card doesn't trigger them. It doesn't trigger their effects. It generates new ones on the board, perhaps. When the second one comes out in any given deck, and there's always going to be 2 in a deck, they're all resolved. You can't put influence or unrest into a country in Civil War. I hope I remember these things. Because influence, you can invest. Okay. Investment is the thing that you're more likely to want to do. Okay. The government player will be whoever has a cube of their own country's government, of their own color government in their country, or their own color government, sorry. If they have a cube, or the government is... And again, I think that's a first result, second result. Again, it's not really stated that way. You got to jump through, but there are times in the rules where it feels like you have to jump through some hoops and maybe make shit up. And so I just want to point that out. By not stating it that way, with rules that are this bad, you do end up grasping for things to try to make them work, like I did with the coup. Okay, first thing that happens is the government player rolls 2 dice. Any armies that he has present, give him an additional die. And then for each of those dice, you add 1 for every army investment of that player or spy of that player. Maximum of 3. Each roll that's a 6 counts as a hit. You keep the count of the hits aside. You remove all the investments. The Civil War wipes out your investment, which is problematic, but you keep the number of hits you scored for later, yeah. Then the rebel player gets 2 dice, plus 1 for each investment of that player and each spy of that player. And if there's 3 Civil War markers in the country or more, you may be limited to 3 in these kind of countries. You're unlimited in national homelands. Add another one. And the maximum for that, again, is 3. Any 6s for the rebel player also count as hits. All the investments of that player get removed. They were counted in the fight. Okay. Then the government player removes 1 Civil War marker for each hit that they got. If there are none left, the government's won the war. It's over. No more Civil War. Nothing else changes. And there will be no unrest. except for if they're occupied. I'm not sure what happens in those cases. Can a coup fall into an unrest? Yeah, I don't think you can't go into a civil war if you're occupied under normal conditions, but there may be cards that allow it. I wouldn't put it past the game. Okay. So that's the way the government wins the war. If the government has an army present, one unrest is placed on the associated country for each hit scored by the rebel. The associated country is the country whose army is present. Now, that is usually going to be the Russians or the Americans, but it might be France, it might be China, which might be kind of neat. If there are multiple associated countries, the rebel gets to choose who they're hitting. If the government player does not have an army present and the rebel scored at least one hit, then the government hasn't won the war because you would have stopped then the rebels win the war and overthrow the government. If neither side has won the war and no hits were scored in step 5, an additional civil war gets added to a maximum of 3, and I think that's going to be the maximum always, but again, there might be holes. The war continues. If neither side has won the war, a player with armies present has the right to withdraw those armies. What it does not say is that the winning player's armies, if the government wins, return. And I think they're supposed to, but I don't see it. Okay, government wins. Let's see. Maybe it's in here. Ah, yes, it is. Align the country, if not already. One friendly cube, and set to one unrest. Place an occupied marker if one or more armies are present. Is that an additional unrest, or is that the unrest that you just set? The way it's worded, it sounds like an additional unrest. But that seems a high price. And then remove the armies. They go back to the force pool, I guess. Rebel wins, government overthrown. Flip all the influence to the opposite player. If none are present, they get one influence. That can be a pretty big hit, right? I don't know. How likely are you to end up in a civil war with lots of influence? Seems pretty unlikely because the coup is sort of the way civil wars usually happen, I think. But remove the government of the previous owner's color if present. What that means is if there's a disk there, if different than the natural government was present, it gets removed. I think. It doesn't say reverse it or anything. Set the country to one unrest and remove any occupation marker. Now this is really interesting because if there was if you're following it in order again, if there was an occupation marker, it's at one unrest with the occupation marker. And then you get rid of the unrest by there being an occupation. So if you read the 1 as the occupation causes a 2-point unrest total, the occupation plus the 1, which is by reading it sequentially. Reading this one would say a rebellious win against an occupying army gets rid of all unrest. Again, I don't know if that's what's intended. That's what the ordering seems to imply. And it's even clearer here because they have these in numbered points as opposed to this, which is just sort of a blob, right? You know, when you do a paragraph, you're more like, well, maybe it's not supposed to be that way. I'm beginning to think they're both supposed to be in order. And so it could end up at 2 or 0 unrest because the set the country to an unrest comes before dealing with any occupation. When a civil war is decided, apply the following to the winning player's progress track. +1 progress for winning a civil war. Wow, I forgot about that. This is a problem. The progress track has lots of things that it does and lots of things that affect it. It's going to move around a lot and it's going to be easy to forget the things that affect it. With this much player aid stuff, I don't think there's a really easy, here's what affects the victory progress marker, which is almost like a, hey, this is kind of what you want to win. You want two things. You want to focus on two things, right? Getting your stars or sickles and the intermediate step of moving the progress thing. There's not some unified chart for that. There's a lot of repeating what's in the rule book, but I find myself having to flip through the rule book because not everything is in here that's of importance. But anyway. Okay. One additional progress if your own army was present at the time of winning. So if the French win, that's just one bonus for you. Or if no one wins, if there was no one there and the government wins. But if the US or Russian army is there, that creates another progress. Progress is nice. It's very clear what you get there. Okay. Here we actually have an example which might tell me what's going on. To civil war removes them all. The government has won. A Soviet government army is present. And so one unrest is placed in the USSR due to the rebel hit. Yeah. Estonia is all... Okay, so this is interesting. Here, you have what feels like a short circuit. If there are none left, the government has won the war. And then in step 12, there's something that the example shows does continue. It's kind of what I would expect, is that the hits would be assigned anyway. So I'm not upset about it in terms of how the game works. I'm upset about how it's worded. As with so much in this. And some of it is just not graspable because it's so poorly put together. If the government does not have an army present in the role, and the government has not already won, if neither side has won the war. Okay, it feels to me like it's fine. You can process all of these as written. The fact that the government has won the war doesn't really mean anything. That's just a clue for later rather than some kind of short-circuiting condition, which is kind of how I read it, but I would have applied this anyway. Okay, no problem. So now we keep going. A Soviet government army. This is nice. The example's here rather than, in the overall play thing, but because confusing, poorly written rules, sometimes the best that the designers can do is, here, let me show you. I can't explain it. The government has won the Civil War, Soviet government army, so one unrest is placed in the USSR. Estonia is already aligned, and unrest will be set to 1. Since there was an army present, we remove it and place an occupied marker, which itself counts as 1 unrest. It really sounds like you're supposed to have 2 unrest at the end in that case, which is what I kind of sussed out from the ordering that was there. But again, there's no trust when rules start falling apart as much as these have. Civil War DRM summary. These are already there, right? +1 DRM and +1 die for each army, +1 DRM for friendly investments, but they all get removed afterwards, and +1 DRM for each, no, if a spy is present. Now this is a little different. These say per. Okay, so the way this is worded is different. For each die, add 1 to the result for each army, investment of the player, and spy of the player. No wording about spies being limited to only 1. However, here, that seems to imply it that way, as opposed to with these where they've got per, they just say if a. Which one applies? I don't know. Throw some dice. Make up your own game. +1 DRM if the Civil War has 3 markers. This is for the rebel. In addition, you wouldn't obviously apply that to both sides. Okay. Armies. Armies are placeable into civil wars, being placed at the cost of 1 money, and we know what they do. And it's important that they take hits, right? As long as there's an army there, hits get turned into unrest in the home country. They don't kill the army. But they do make, and they kind of make it so it's harder to lose the Civil War, right? How do you lose a Civil War? When the army isn't there. So if a big country, even if France, has its army or an army present in a civil war, that civil war is not going to be lost. As long as the British wanted to keep fighting in the American Revolution, it would have, gone on forever. But they couldn't stand it. They had too many unrest markers, right? It is actually a good story behind that seems to work across all ages. Okay. An army may be placed in a civil war if friendly influence is present and no player's army is already present. Every time the U.S. places an army, it causes a U.S. unrest. Both sides also get their free technology when placing an army on a die roll of 3 or higher. Now this is where that example before came that we looked up, but somewhere else it referred to this with placing military or something, and it didn't tell you that. So it's like, yeah, you gotta hunt and find the place. I don't know if you remember it. Or place an available army into a civil war, which must have your own influence cube. And then here we go. Oh no, there's the on a 3 or more. Okay, it's just that I couldn't read it because it was trailing. Okay. The French army begins the game in Indochina. It may deploy to Algeria through a card, and it'll act like a regular army. And after applying unrest from hits received, the owning player can choose to abandon the country if desired. To do so, you remove all armies back to the force pool. The idea here is we can't keep sending men into the meat grinder. Okay. Aggressions. This one I never got to do. The conventional balance track may grant aggressions to the superior power. At the beginning of the game, the Russians have level 2, which allows them to do a major aggression, and they have a +1 DRM for the aggression modifier. If they're at level 1, they're allowed something called minor aggressions. We'll see that. Microaggressions. Okay. Some cards also grant aggressions, and the U.S. President can give you aggression. Use 1 aggression at +0 or use own mod. Wonder what that all means. Okay, we'll have to figure that out. There is a president role, so that actually, I think, covers the specifics. All right. Using aggression costs money. You have to pay with a money card, usually, unless it's free. If a card says you may do an aggression, it, I hope, tells you can take a money owed for it, but if it doesn't, we'll have to try to remember that. If the U.S. uses an aggression, they get an unrest for a minor aggression or 2 unrests for a major aggression in the U.S. If the USSR does it, they get 2 embargo markers in the Western trade box on a minor aggression and 3 on a major aggression. Embargoes prevent trade while present and may also prevent the use of the Soviet military export card, which is selling weaponry. Uh-oh, gotta swap batteries somehow. I say the rules are kind of interleaved poorly. I think this is the only place the embargo marker is mentioned. So you're kind of looking at those markers and like, where do these come in? No index, nothing to look up, nothing to find, not enough numbering to help you even if it did. If it set you to 3.6, you'd be scratching your head saying, what the fuck? Okay. Additionally, the U.S. player, if the Soviets use an aggression, may make 1 free remove trade item spy action at no cost right away and without exhausting a spy. I don't know if they have to have a spy on the board. Seems like kind of an edge case there, but I mean, they probably do. There are cases where you get to do a free spy action and it has to do with where the spy is. This particular one, it doesn't matter where your spy is. It doesn't matter if it's even on the board, probably. Okay, A minor aggression allows an attack against any 0 or 1 worth country which is not occupied. A major aggression allows a roll against any country. The target country must be adjacent to an aligned country with your own color government. Boy, that's a pretty big set of requirements there. Your own color government is this, or the disk. Aligned is a cube, just one. There aren't many places, you know. There's a lot of places you can't go. You can't send the Russians into Brazil, you know. Okay. But, you know, you telling me the U.S. couldn't make it there? I don't know. I don't know. Venezuela? I mean, they didn't. But they did there. Were they aligned? Panama probably was. Okay. And also that's in an earlier era. If the target country is occupied, okay. If the target country is occupied or has the enemy government color, check the nuclear balance track and roll a die. The mad die roll. If inside the range specified, okay, the range specified. This is interesting. So we have these numbers here. This took me a while to guess what they mean. These numbers up here mean shit. They're on all the charts, so ignore them. The numbers here, I think, are one side and the other. So if you're on this side of the chart, on a 2 or higher, the U.S. succeeds here. But on a 6, the Soviets succeed there. Okay? I think that's what they mean. I don't think what they mean is between a 2 and a 6, between a 4 and a 6, only on a 5, and what the fuck. However, again, you're gonna, you know, if if you're not able to figure that out, you're probably going to have to go look for some kind of example, and we got one here, to see what the hell they're talking about. That's how well they explain this shit. Okay. Yeah, I know. I'm doing just as badly in my own ways, but I'm not. There are other people who are covering this thing, who are giving you the rundown on how you play and whatever. I don't think that's particularly important when you're trying to look to see, do I want to buy this? You know? But it is important, the understanding of the general rules, which is the earlier part of my video, I think is of some significant importance to understanding how the playthrough is going to happen. Okay. What do we got there? Okay, so if it's in that range, the money card, essentially, for doing an aggression is wasted. No aggression takes place. Standoff back down. Any unrest or embargo placed is still valid. I.e., you tried, and you looked like shit, and the U.S. grain embargo came off, or whatever. Note that the Soviets cannot make a mad roll of any kind until they have an atom bomb. Country in civil war can be a target. It'll be resolved as normal. You ignore the civil war, but don't remove it. It'll continue. You put an army into the country if you now occupy it. Okay. You roll 2 dice. The highest die counts. You get one of these results. Your DRMs are your aggression modifier. Your aggression modifier comes off the conventional balance. It's 1 or 2 at the high ends. -1 for each adjacent country of 2 worth or more with an enemy government type. Ignore C connections for this if you have the Naval Advantage. USSR, USA, and China always apply -1. Okay? Sure? What? I don't know why this is in parentheses and what it means, but hey, whatever. I guess there's always a -1 to using one of those three countries to attack. Or maybe it's if you're attacking them. Or maybe it's, here's the most likely what they mean. If one of those three countries is adjacent, it automatically provides a -1. That seems the closest to what makes sense for the parentheses, but again, who knows? It's not the way to write. -1 if adjacent by sea and not naval advantaged, i.e., just saying what it's saying here, but trying to repeat it, I think, unless they're trying to say something else. I don't know. +1 if in a civil war and no enemy army present. It'll be easier to fight somebody who's in a civil war. That makes sense. Naval advantage. The advantage player can apply -1 to the high die. If this is done, roll another die and add 1 unrest to the naval advantaged player's homeland on a roll of 1, 2, or 3. Just on the high die? What does that mean? DRMs for me elsewhere have been whatever. I think this means every die, or whichever die is being used, or whatever. But what if they're tied? Is there a high die? Is there not? You know what? Again, make your own rules up. Roll some dice. Okay. If this is done, roll another die and add 1 unrest to the naval advantage player's homeland on a roll of 1, 2, or 3. And I don't see anything that talks about this elsewhere. Okay, so what happens on the different rolls? A blitzkrieg. Okay, you get a success. Well, we haven't defined success. In addition, you can attack again adjacent to the previous target country right away. There's no further cost or embargo or unrest. You just pick another target and keep slamming in. Success. Place an occupied marker in the target country, if not already present, and a destruction marker on the rightmost revealed factory symbol. Here it could actually be not the only remaining one. Switch the government, although I don't know. Switch the government to that of the aggressor and place 1 influence cube there. Okay, with success and blitzkrieg, you get everything you want, kind of. Yeah. Occupied you might not want. You don't really want to destroy the factory, but you get the government change and you get an influence marker. Now, place 1 influence cube there doesn't mean you get control, right? That could be remove 1 from the enemy. The enemy could end up in, you occupied it, and the enemy ends up in control still. That's how I read that. Political success. Place 1 friendly influence in the target country or an unrest and an investment. Okay. Failure. Place 1 unrest in the target country and 1 in the aggressing player's homeland. If either die is a modified 1, you get 2 unrest in the aggressing player's homeland. I assume that is total, not in addition to the 1. And we could read through this and try to answer questions. Maybe they get answered, maybe they don't. It is unlikely because it's just going to show 1 path through. So unless we happen to have, what is it? Where's the 1? A naval advantage where the high die is defined, we don't get an answer to that. And this is kind of funny. Is there anywhere? I mean, there's places like Sudan that seem kind of out of reach of naval power. Or China. Yeah, Kazakhstan. I mean, hey. So yeah, let's see. Allow the advantage player. All right, let's see if there's a naval advantage. Die roll is 5, modified divided 4, political success. The U.S. player has a naval advantage and applies a further -1. Now this is interesting. So all these other effects are automatic. The naval advantage appears to happen after the die is rolled by this. That's not specified. That's not what I would guess. But, I mean, it's as good a reading as before, I guess, you know, that you have to announce it. Either way, it should say. But here's where it says, buried in an example. The end result is failure. Unrest is placed in West Germany and the USSR. Okay. So they only talk about one die, and they do not answer the question. They don't say they rolled 2 dice, and the question we had is really what happens if they're both 5s. I'm assuming they're both the high die, but it's a really strange thing to declare it this way when everything else is just modifiers to the die roll. All right. Enough grouching yet? Never. The president. At the end of every turn. Well, let's take a moment and try to remember about this game. What does it mean to be a turn? That's each of those. That's an entire deck of cards. Okay? Putting it in Twilight Struggle terms, you have maybe 3 turns in a game of Twilight Struggle to the equivalent of this. Different way of mechanizing the cards. These move a little faster. You don't have to think about most of them. But the U.S. player rolls 2 dice and looks up the result on the U.S. player map. The dice are each modified as indicated, and the markers are then placed in the relevant boxes on the president display. This is an odd thing. The rest of the game works with like roll 2 dice, take 1 value. In this case, both values matter. Each box gives an effect that can be triggered once during the current turn. Mark each result with a disc. Use the effect and remove the disc when desired. Items 1, civil rights, and 2 to 3, economy, can be used right away when rolled. Conceivably, I guess you could get the same one twice and use it twice. Now, here's what's missing. What's understood here. These I get. Reroll 1 influence roll for in a non-communist government. That makes sense. Somebody's doing an influence roll. You have the ability to say, yeah, no, stop. Okay. Reroll 1 trade roll. When am I allowed to do this? Once during the coming turn during the U.S. player's activity. So this is important. This can only be an influence on a U.S. triggered activity. Right? Now, during the U.S. player's activity, what does that mean? Right? Can that influence a card effect? Can it influence a blue card effect and not a red one? I don't know. Don't know. You would think that that would be valuable for its containment, for stopping Soviet activity, but that's not positive. It may be any time the U.S. is doing an influence. However, that's different than a U.S. player's activity, right? I don't know. The term activity isn't really defined. Possible actions to a money card are defined. Activity? I don't know. So I'm going to guess it's something the U.S. is inspiring for this. For this, you'd be just changing one of those trade rolls. There's a good chance that the Russians have used up the trade before you get a chance to use it. Yeah, probably at least 50-50. May use 1 aggression at 0. So this is the interesting one. What the fuck does that mean? May use 1 aggression at +0 or use own mod. I'm guessing they mean here. Conventional balance. At $1 cost. I think that just means it gives me the capability to do an aggression. Presumably anywhere. Like, by anywhere I mean I can go into a worth 2 country or worth 3 country or whatever. So I could roll into East Germany at the height of everything using that. That's pretty serious intervention there. All right. I need to pause. I definitely say, look, you're just being too harsh. The game could still be good. And I had some fun with it. But it does bring up two clear points when you look at a game that is got rules in this shape. It has not been blind tested. There is no way this got through blind testing. Okay? There is just no fucking way. Seems like there are people who believe in it and people who do not. It used to be the standard in the hobby. And much, much more frightening, I don't think it's been break tested. When I say break tested, I mean people who are looking through those rules, trying to find that little edge that they can screw someone over with. The rules lawyer player. Okay? I know it may sound like I'm that sometimes. I'm really not. If you see me play, I'm just like, fuck it, whatever. You know? And I make up rules left and right in games. But it is a significant problem. And this is, again, this is not the only game that faces this, but this is one of the worst, one of the more egregious cases that I've seen in a while. Every so often it comes up where I'm just like, oh man, this is just so broken in terms of the rule book. And, you know, I mean, with my Azure Wish games, I throw my hands up in the air and say, I know what I'm getting. I also know that I'm going to have something, you know, there's a very good chance I'm going to have something that I really like and that I can puzzle it out. This game's a lot more the hidden levers type of game. You know, I don't have obvious goals like go colonize something. There's less actions, there's less direct, intuitive decision making. So I'm doing very Twilight Struggle type stuff. And if I don't know where the little levers, you know, if the levers are so complicated that I can't figure out what they're doing, and there's no intuitive understanding of everything that's going on, it becomes really, really hard to figure out just what needs to be fixed, what's not written right, whatever, in terms of how am I going to play this. And you see that with some of my things. What do they mean by this? What do they mean by this? I can't come up with a good argument that is absolute, you know? Okay. Soviet 5-year plan. At the end of every turn, Soviet player is going to roll a die and get something he's got to get. We already talked about this. When he gets a full level of tech in that, he gets a little, I don't know. He gets a bonus. Let's see what that bonus is. If this happens, remove the disc on the 5-year plan track and add 1 victory progress. Beautiful. It's specific here for the Soviet player. Progress is this, not the little hammer and sickles. And that's what I had come to before, but like when I first read it, it was weird. Note that code breaking on the industry tech tree is exempted and cannot be used to achieve the 5-year plan. Tech theft can be used. And you want to do it all the time? Yeah, okay. Every time you get a chance. Western trade. Okay, here we got some things that did not make sense to me. The Soviets can trade oil money or the single military exports card. This allows them to purchase trade items which become available. The Soviets can trade only with oil or the single money arms counter, not regular money. We've got little counters for these trades. So they're not just a disc, which is what I thought at one point. Soviets can trade only with oil or the single money arms counter, not regular money. Each turn, 1 trade item may become available at the end of the turn. There's none at the first turn. They are held in the trade box until purchased and cost 1 money each. They cannot be purchased if any embargo markers are in the Western trade box. Agricultural trade adds 2 farming tech successes when acquired. Okay, what are tech successes? I don't know if that's 2 cubes. That would be like tech investments. Did we hit tech yet? I don't know. Here we have tech development. So this is an interesting question. What are we calling it? Tech successes? Is that what it's called? 2 farming tech successes. I think it's a cube, but it's not something that I see here. The only thing that has a success involved in it is this. Several technologies have a die symbol next to them. When one of these techs would be fully researched, that's the term for when you get a disk on a space. There's nothing for tech success that I've seen until here. Roll 1 die. If the die roll is indicated range, you may lose 1 accumulated research. There is no die roll for cubes. To place a cube, you must have fully researched. There's nothing about a success, right? So they're introducing this new term that is unused anywhere else, and this is kind of the problem that I thought I had with something else. But anyway, okay. I'm going to say it's cubes, but okay. That one's pretty easy. Technology trade, apply 2 successes towards technology advancement. That's beginning to sound even more like cubes. Of any type, but only 1 success for farming or industry. What do they mean by or? I mean, seriously. If it had said only 1 success for farming and industry, and you might have added combined just to clarify, I would get it. Only 1 success for farming or industry. Can I add 1 of each? Or can I only add 1 between them? I don't know. I don't know. I think they mean 1 between them, but I'm not sure. Oil industry trade. This is the weird one. This is the one I dealt with. Ignores reduces the cost to put the next triggered Soviet oil card in play. Add 1 to the die roll to trigger the card. This is written on the card. You do not need to remember. I had one of the cards. It didn't make any more sense with that. Nothing happened. No oil was produced. No increases were made. Nothing happened. I don't know. 1 successful use consumes this item. Keep it somewhere handy until this happens, like the USSR box. So nowhere, I think, does it say you get rid of the trade markers. So as trade markers are produced by random chance, they become available. You can buy them and use them, and then there's a better chance you get them back. And uh-oh, we gotta swap batteries again. This is a similar case to what I thought I had with the Soviet 5-year plan, where it wasn't clear to me what you gained, but in this particular place where it's written up, it does say victory progress. That's good enough. But you know, on the victory progress track, would have been a little bit clearer, but okay. 1 successful use can, yeah. So I think without the card, it can't possibly make sense. We could dig one up, hold on. The Soviet oil card looks like. +1 if the Soviet player holds an oil trade marker. That's what it does. Okay. And on a 1 through 3, nothing happens. On a 4 or 5, you increase Soviet oil production 1 box if the Soviets pay money and the oil trade marker helps them. If production is 2, is that afterwards? I don't know. Increase Soviet oil production 1 box if Soviet production of 2 is as high as it goes. So yeah. Increase Soviet oil production 1 box if Soviets pay $1 or an oil tech marker. Yeah. Okay. And if production is 2 there. Yeah. All right. So I just wasn't awake enough for that card to see I rolled a die that didn't generate anything and didn't pay attention. But I think it is clear with the card. And end of turn generation of a trade marker. You roll a die, you get something, Stalin gives you a penalty for it. A marker which is generated is placed on the Soviet player mat in the Western trade box. The counter limit for each type is intentionally limited to 1. If generated, it is already on the mat, and generated again, you place nothing. Soviet leadership. This is other stuff that I got to late in the game. Given that I messed a lot of stuff up on the stuff I thought I understood, the Soviet leadership track on the Soviet player map shows who is running the show. At the start of the game, it's Stalin. Stalin rules until he dies. Once he dies, the track enters play. To use the track, you roll a die and apply any DRM based on disk's current position on the track. That's the DRM side here. The roll is going to be the leader that you get. I don't know what the number here is. That may be how many reform cubes you get. Then place the disk in the resulting space. Note the reforms track may also provide a DRM for this roll depending on position. Apply both. We got some bonuses there. Okay. A new leader is rolled for when Stalin dies, and on every even turn, and those are marked with the Soviet leader over here. We may not make it. The main effect of leadership determined is the reform value. Stalin has a 0. The progressive has a 3. A progressive is not allowed at the start of the game. He's unlocked when the position on the freedom and reforms track allows it. If a progressive does come into power, all occupations in Soviet-aligned or communist-governed countries are removed from the map. This is done without any cost, and the Soviets can no longer occupy countries. Yeah, tell Putin that, okay? Soviet freedom and reforms. Soviet freedom and reforms track on the Soviet player mat shows the status of freedom in the USSR. This starts in Stalin's cult of personality and can move to the right throughout the game. These have effects on them. At the end of each turn, the reforms value of the current leader is added to the freedom and reforms track using cubes. 1 extra cube is added if the Soviet player is winning the game, has more hammer and sickle markers than the US has stars. During the appropriate point at the end turn sequence, if there are cubes equal to the next space's value, move the disk along 1 box and remove all cubes. There's been a reform. So you make these moves. These have effects, like this causes -1 unrest, this causes 2, 3, 4 unrest, all positive, not so good. But some of these generate hammer and sickles, not just progress markers. Where are we? During the appropriate point at the end of the turn, if their cubes equal, yeah. But before this happens, the Soviet player can take an action to prevent a reform. 1 cube can be removed from the freedom and reforms track by the Soviet player exhausting a spy and placing 1 unrest. Any number of cubes can be removed during a turn or at the end of the turn by doing this when there are spies available to be exhausted. When the marker moves to the right, implement the effects on the track. Remove unrest. That's anywhere. Add Soviet diplomacy. That's a card that will give the Soviets some bonuses. X unrest. The U.S. player can place unrest in the USSR or any communist countries adjacent to the Ukraine. Progressive allowed in power. You remove that big no marker that says the progressive can't play. Leadership plus DRM. The highest DRM in the force is added to the leadership roll. Leadership. We take whichever one's highest there. What about the Federation? Elections in Russian Federation are not effects. They just explain what's being represented. Okay. Oh, boy. And the poor battery is dying on me. We've left out major parts of this so far. All right. We're taking another break. Get this done tonight and loaded. It's already past my bedtime now, so I don't know. I'm at the spine of the rule book. Luckily, though, there is a lot that doesn't really count. So we're looking at another 6 pages. All right, tech development. I think I've mainly explained this. When you place a cube, you've fully researched anything previous. You got multiple arrows that you can follow. Branching. A tech is fully researched when you have cubes equal to the number on top of the chart, which is this column number. Now, this was also not clear. They talk about the first box, and I immediately thought it was this. There's one place in the setup where they talk about first box, and everywhere else they tell you what's going on. This is the one where they talk about first box, and it's because there's multiple boxes with the same name. But if they had used the name as well, it would have been very, very helpful. It was not clear to me. And it also, though, wasn't clear to me that you don't enter this box until I started actually playing. So again, you know, it's just this sort of all right. Wow, there's strange things moving. Disk shows when a technology is completed. When you fully research a technology, you replace you remove the cubes and replace it with a disk. Claim all the benefits. Some of these have a die roll. You have to roll the number or numbers listed there, or else you lose one level of research and you didn't get it, and you got to keep going. You got to keep trying at it. In addition to the research cubes, Moonbase costs $3 to turn it active. You place a disk when researching and track money spent with cubes. Once you place enough cubes there for that cache, you get the extra victory point for that. Now, some of these give a bonus to the first person who gets to them. And they'll say that. And I don't know where they say that. Doomsday device. First satellite, I'm guessing. Yeah, first only is stated there. Okay, so that's how it shows. And there are a few of them here. The moon landing and the moon base, both players can get the full chit of victory, not a progress, a victory counter. For one technology lapses, code breaking lapses at the end of the turn. Again, I've given my arguments against that, but whatever. At the end of every turn, the disks on that are removed and it must be researched again. It's a cheap one. It only takes one cube, but it's not automatic, and what it gives you is a reroll, a one-use reroll. The Soviet player gets a die roll when his fully researched land-air technology. This is referred to as the interceptor roll. On a 5 or a 6, he can take a U.S. bomber out of the strategic weapons box. And those are listed there. Say out of play or is removed from... One U.S. bomber is removed from the game, but only if there are 2 or more currently in play in the strategic weapons box. Yeah, so that's interesting. Actually, removed from play. That's a little different than being put back in the force pool, right? Okay. Here's what's not noted. Anything about getting that technology into your force pool, okay? You will gain a technology for some of these, and I think that's spelled out somewhere. Not here. It may be spelled out in the setup roles or something. Maybe in the deployment of weapons. We'll see. Okay, let's hold off on that. But Again, we had this big question about the nukes. Tech theft, markers put in for each 2 U.S. Technologies fully researched up into the tech theft box. When there's 2, you remove the marker and roll a die. The die roll places it somewhere at random. There can never be more than 2 in any location. If you're already doubled up, you don't, and you roll the same number, another one doesn't show up. And that's basically for where the spies can find the stuffs. Okay, nuclear weapons. When you deploy your own, this is where we're here. When a country develops its own nuclear weapons, place a nuclear weapons marker with the appropriate flag. Well, this is like the British nuclear weapons. Additionally, either player may choose to deploy one of their available nuclear weapon markers in a friendly country. All we have right now is 1 U.S. nukes there and the capability of 1 here. There's a whole bunch in the tray. Let's keep going. Here we go. A player with the atom bomb has 1 available counter and receives another 2 when ICBMs are developed. So let's find those other 2 for each. I'm going to put these with the ICBMs. Maybe it tells me in the instructions to do this. I don't recall it doing so. It actually says it there, but again, you get this kind of frustration level when you're looking at the game and you're saying, I don't know if I'm going to be using all these pieces. Okay. And that is all of them. To deploy nuclear weapons, a country must have a friendly government and be aligned. That's only 1 cube. I assume they can be more than aligned. Instead of placing an investment marker, you place an available nuclear weapons counter. Multiple nuclear weapons can be deployed into the same country. If a country with 1 or more nuclear weapons is targeted for aggression, 2 dice are rolled on the mad die roll to prevent aggression. What does that do? Well, that's a good question. Are they added? Do you take the high one? I don't know. Does not specify. If a nuclear weapon is placed within 2 spaces of the enemy homeland, you add 1 unrest to the enemy homeland at the end of each turn. So, why you don't want nukes in Cuba. Or Venezuela. Once your power develops SLBM, submarine launched ballistic missiles, no more unrest can be placed on your homeland from this rule. Because you will have a first strike. It's not going to be that quick, warningless attack. If a country with placed weapons switches to the enemy government type, the weapons are removed and 1 influence can be placed within 2 spaces of the country. Only 1, no matter how many are removed. Also, removed weapons counters are removed. Any removed weapons counters are removed from the game. I guess it's one of your own influences? Again. If both players have nuclear weapons which would cause unrest placement, they must be removed on a 1-for-1 basis before any unrest is placed. This is the Cuba-Turkey deal, right? Sort of. Even if 1 or both players have SLBM. So it's not if they would cause unrest placement. Removed weapons are removed from the game. Nuclear weapons can be deployed to a friendly country to ensure they are not interfered with by enemy superpower. This was generally used as a defensive measure, but it looks extremely hostile to the other side. Okay. A nuclear weapon marker with a flag belongs to the country. Apply the first rule only. Okay, so this is the situation here. There are countries which will develop their own nuclear weapons. England is one of them, the earliest of them. They will only get the first rule only, assured destruction. So we look here, and that's this. It would get 2 dice for the mad roll, which may be added or not. We're not sure. Okay. Strategic weapons and nuclear balance. There's several types of military units which can be built during the game. Armies are useful only during civil wars. All other units are strategic weapons which affect the nuclear balance. Units can be built when in a player force pool. Most units don't start in the force pool and need to have the prerequisite technology research before they can be constructed. Every unit costs 1 money. When a unit is built, it may immediately cancel an eligible enemy unit on the strategic weapons box. The builder of the unit chooses whether this applies or not and chooses which enemy unit is canceled. Bombers can only cancel bombers. ICBMs can cancel either ICBMs or bombers. SLMBs, all of those. MIRV can only cancel MIRV. Mobile missile can only cancel mobile missile. And a bunker can be used to cancel anything and is sort of the cheapest thing you can build. But you can only have one at a time. A unit which is built either cancels an enemy unit or is placed in the strategic weapons box. The nuclear balance is calculated as follows. 2 for each unique type unmatched by the enemy in the strategic weapons box, which is why, I said this before, why the U.S. has a level 2 advantage, because they have that bomber in there. And 1 for each further unit unmatched in the strategic weapons box. Both sides perform the calculation, removing one total from the other to calculate the position on the balance track. When a player marker advances into or through a space with an unrest symbol, they create the unrest markers in the enemy homeland. That's already accounted for there. Only count spaces where your strategic balance position moves to the left for the Americans, right for the Russians. Units which are removed by cancellation or technical advance are removed from the game. Units removed by technical advance are chosen by the advancing player. Units can be removed from the force pool or even removed before they can be built due to technology restriction. Duck and cover, bunkers. Bunkers don't count as a unique unit type. Its only function is to cancel an enemy unit, so the only point in building it is to cancel an enemy weapon. To place it into the force pool also costs 1 research success. Spend 1 research cube on it and place it into the force pool. Now this is interesting because you start with bunkers here. Aha! You don't start with them. You have to spend a research cube to get it in your force pool. Then you have to spend $1 to build and deploy it. And then it will cancel out 1 weapon and be gone forever. Okay. All right. Intelligence assessments. Every time a game effect or card alters one side's intel assessment value, move the side's marker up 1 box on the track. If you can't move it any further, move the other side down. The important thing is the differential. If one side is in a higher box, then that side may claim a reroll of any 1 die for each box higher. Take the reroll marker for each box as soon as it is earned. Any 1 die may be rerolled except for die rolls made during the end of the turn phase. This includes opponent die rolls. A die can only be rerolled once, no matter what the mechanism used, spies, whatever. Once used, the reroll is returned to the reroll box, and allocation will be determined again at the end of the turn. Okay, so you get them automatically if something changes, but I guess they also show up in the end of turn sequence. Victory progress tracks. The aim of the game is to exert control over economically powerful countries, those with more factory symbols. Hey, so far we have no idea what this oil does, right? It's a mystery. Each country's economic worth is its value for victory purposes. To be counted, the country must have your influence, your government type, and not be in civil war. Okay, I made lots of mistakes there. I thought I had only missed the Civil War one. I also missed the government type. So these things are worthless because they're sitting. Okay. Whenever worth is gained or lost, adjust your victory progress track a number of boxes equal to the factory worth of the country gained or lost. So if the U.S. lost the U.K., they would lose 2 points on their progress track. If a Soviet influence was put in there instead, they wouldn't gain it. They would have to convert the government as well. All right, so that changes the game again from how I played it. All right, when the marker reaches the end of your track, you get one of these markers. And apparently they sit in your home country, which seems weird to me, but whatever. If it gets to the start of the track and wraps around having to lose points, when you pass here, you lose a space, a star or a hammer. Okay. Other ways to earn. And this is the rule that killed me up in certain ways. It just lists these. Stars in HS can also be earned via research, Soviet agriculture self-sufficiency. 3-1 is Soviet only. Oh, the moon landing and moon base are two of those. The third is the agriculture. Reforms for the Soviet player up to 4. U.S. debt, 1 each possible, but only 1 at once. We've got that. Reaching the end of the nuclear balance track, that's worth 1. Okay, so we got kind of an idea of this, but these are stars and hammer and sickle. Okay, yeah, those are the big guys. Notably, what's not in there is the 5-year plan, which is actually, yeah. Evening up. At the end of each turn, players discard 1 star for 1 hammer and sickle, 1 at a time, until one player has only 1 left, and then they stop. Why do you keep 1? I don't know. Why not go down to 0? I don't know. How to win. The number of hammer and sickle or star markers are used for victory. If you have 3 more markers than the enemy, you win a decisive victory at the end of the turn, but you can't win this way until the end of turn 4. Otherwise, you go all the way to turn 9, and the player with the most hammer and sickles or stars wins the game. Progress markers does not matter at all at that point. You win by having 1 more marker. It's a minor victory, but you win by 2 or more markers. It's a major victory. Geographic objectives. Okay. Several countries are printed with either a star and hammer or sickle icon. These are all adjacent to the enemy home country, to one of the home countries. If the indicated country becomes aligned to the enemy player and has the government of the enemy player, i.e., they're getting the worth in points on their victory progress for it, then the enemy player can claim +1 intel assessment on the intel assessment track. If the country is marked with a hammer and sickle, you also add a reform cube to the Soviet reform track every turn end, because you're turning a neighbor into a happier democracy type thing. It's a more appealing government form and causes unrest. Okay. What do we not see here? Well, why those countries have these chips for them. Maybe as an extra mnemonic device, I have no idea. Again, the black cubes are never referenced in the rules either. You have this feeling that you're playing a game that you're not really sure that you got all the rules, because they're this mishmash, and you fought through them, and you can't find anything, but it doesn't make the sense that you think it did. You can always, take your chances, as people always do with a Kickstarter type thing, and say, you know what, I guess maybe they're going to refine this or something. There's things I like about it. And there are things I like about it. Seriously, watch a little bit of the playthrough, see what I'm fiddling around with. And the core system, like the other game I'm playing right now, has some appealing facets to it. And I am also very interested in the subject matter, but that doesn't matter. All right, waterways. These represent strategic waterways of the Canal, Suez, Panama, and they're marked with these aircraft carriers for some reason, and then the Dardanelles. And for each of these countries that's Soviet aligned and has a communist government, both red cube and red government, the naval balance track moves in favor of the Soviets. We want a warm water port. Adjust this whenever it happens. The maximum is 3 naval balance adjustments by the Soviet ownership of all 3 locations. I don't know what happens if you've already got like Soviet naval balance in your favor and you get all 3 of them or something. fantasy scenario, right? But whatever. At the end of the turn, you're going to do a bunch of things that are really just bookkeeping tasks, but they're important. The turn marker moves to the next turn. You check to make sure that nobody's won and that you even out the counters so they don't end up a huge pile. The Soviets roll their 5-year plan. They roll for a new trade item. They roll for new tech theft. There's an automatic roll that may add a tech theft somewhere on the board without having to go through there. They roll for leadership change once Stalin's dead. They can add reform cubes to the freedom and reforms track according to the current leader. They get an extra one if they're winning the game at this point, and one per democratic and blue-aligned nation marked with a hammer and sickle. That's the rule persisting to these. And again, we've got those extra counters. Then you see if a reform takes place, which is if the cubes add up enough here to move you forward. If it would, the Soviet player may exhaust spies to try to prevent it. You remove an embargo marker from the Western trade box, if any are present. They're preventing the Soviets from being able to use that trade, and I think the weapons trade as well. Yeah, although that may be just a modifier. The U.S. gets to roll for their president and see what he allows them. They get an extra point of debt retired. All the spies flip over to unused. An unrest is placed for each nuclear weapon within 2 of your homeland if you don't have the subs. Code-breaking disks go away. Intelligence assessment is rechecked to see what the difference is, and you get new additional rerolls for that. I assume this is a counter mix limit. I don't know what the hell happens if there are none available because people are hoarding them or something. Mainframe computers will give you a tech cube. I think the other kind gives you a full tech at this point. Take the discard pile of cycle cards. Add new cards for the new turn. Shuffle them in. Check for new money. Why? I don't know what this is supposed to mean. You got it here. It's available to view. I don't know what you can do when you check for it other than notice that it's there. Again, wording that's there that I don't understand the why. The Soviet player can add oil sales cards, roll if necessary, to the deck. This is a different set. That's these. If oil value is more than $1, add oil money. Only added by oil production. So this one goes in for free. I guess the others are additional ones. We've got these here. That's indicating that you can buy them with it. Only added by oil production. That's 2. Only added by oil production. That's 3. That's a reparations. What does this mean? Damned if I know. And again, it's not going to be in the playthrough. Only added by oil production. And then you may add oil sales cards. Roll if necessary. That's got to be the 5 or more. Well, maybe not. You may add oil sales cards. Roll if necessary to the deck. I have no idea. And again, I don't get the oil production thing. It didn't make sense. Maybe this card makes sense, does it? This increases the oil production 1 box if they pay. This just changes this. The oil production box doesn't really tell me what's going on with it. And I can only add these somewhere it was saying something about only add them if there's extra money. So I just don't know. I just don't know. You know. So I've got 3 normal ones. Right? This only goes to 2. What does that mean? I don't know. Do I roll a 5 or more and get 2 more? I don't know. I don't know. What about these? If oil value is more than $1, oh, this one's one of these too. And these 2, do I get both of them at $2 because it's more than $1? I don't know. I don't know. None of it makes sense to me. Maybe some magic will come and I will get it. And then you shuffle that new deck you've created. Most of the cards for that turn have been removed from the game. They're one use only. And that's it. We get to this. Do they add oil at the end of this? That would be a thing that I don't understand. I have to pee so bad. Hold on. The way they word this, the Soviet player may add oil sale cards, roll if necessary to the deck, not applicable. They're just repeating this. And they say it's not applicable because the oil production marker gives no oil currently. Great. Okay. So we are pretty sure that we don't understand how oil works. We'll make something up. We'll throw some cards in. I don't know how many. I get the feeling that if you're at any oil production, you get all, I don't know. I mean, it is really a mystery. And this is one of the worst things that I've found in the game, is this one is just not there as far as I can see. Maybe it's somewhere on here, but I doubt it. I really doubt it. They're going to repeat the same word. Oil sales card if necessary to that. Yeah. You know. And it's like May. What does that mean? I don't know. And roll if necessary seems to indicate that, like, this is only, if there is a die roll for the first card, it's only when you're in that box. Oil production, oil production, oil money, oil money, oil money. Okay, so here's the difference. There's 2 oil production. Only added by oil production. Only added by oil production. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what these are. I got 4 of these. Now, if here's an example. I have X amount of oil production, either 1 or 2, or most of 1. The price of oil is $1 each. These are worth $1 each. If the price of oil was $2, I would get 1 extra card per oil production. If it was $3, I would get 2 extra cards per oil production. That's what I think it means, now that I can think. Because the urine ain't filling my brain. Okay. I do suggest that you look a little bit at how the play works. Obviously, this, yeah, maybe look at somebody else's review of it, but I'm not sure how much I trust that people gave it a full shot. Now, some people will obviously go back and forth with the developer or the designer and try to figure out what the hell is meant, and try to short circuit the situation so they don't have to cut through this, or they'll gloss over the parts of the rule that they don't understand and think whether or not they played it right. They made a best guess, just like I'm going to make. But you don't see the struggle there, and you don't see what's involved in it, and you don't see what decisions you would make that are different from mine as to how to interpret the rules. I did find a lot of capacity, like combing through this again. Yeah, some rules became clearer. Some concepts became clearer. There's no question. Thinking about stuff, I now kind of think I understand the oil money. I didn't reading it, but I may not remember. That's what a rule book's for. Because when you learn things, it's easy enough to forget them. And then if you can't find them, what you got to do then is try to find that piece of your mind that was floating around, 2 weeks ago when you first started figuring this thing out. My gut feeling is this needs to be rewritten significantly. If possible, it needs to be reorganized in a manner. For one thing, more numbers and more references and index, stuff like that. That's sine qua non. Where it's hard to find something, where they're giving contradictory statements or maybe saying things they don't mean, they got to tighten up the rules a little bit on that. Are they going to do it? Who the hell knows? This is the mystery with Kickstarters always. I would not have... Some of the games that I look at are in, more of a playtest type level. I don't think this is in that level. I think this was being sent out to review as in, we're pretty close, we think we've got it. Well, it was not blind tested, that is damn clear, which to me is a real problem. And I don't see how it could have been tested by people who like to break games. Which means there may be significant problems that I'm not going to see. It takes more playtests than I'm able to do on here. And I just will not see that. All I can give you is, as I start seeing things, if I have the rules right, this seems wrong type of statements, because I can't even guarantee I have the rules right with this rule book. Look at the time it took to figure out the oil thing, right? I've looked at it before, it didn't make any sense. Okay, maybe the rest of you are brighter than I am. Maybe you all saw that these two values and the number of cards and it all works. But that's the kind of puzzle you have to face. And if you have to face that kind of puzzle to figure out what the designers meant by the rules, and yes, that is the most egregious case, I think. I think it's just a rule that's been left out. But there are other cases where they're glossed over too quickly, where they're very sloppy, and where there's a ton of room for misinterpretation. And when you start throwing that all together, it becomes much, much easier not to notice things that should be clear, but aren't, because you're working so hard to get the stuff, to try to make the wheels interlock in some way that's not total garbage. All right, I'm sending this up. I don't know how much I'll be able to get to play tomorrow, because I'm probably going to need to sleep after work.